Hello, everyone, and welcome to Smartkarma Corporate Webinar. I'm Vidhi Bhatt from the Corporate Solutions team at Smartkarma. We are very glad to have with us today Boustead Singapore's Group CIO, Keith Chu. Joining him from the Corporate Marketing and Investor Relations team are Debbie Tan and Janet Chia. We will start this webinar with the team walking us through a company presentation, after which Keith will engage in a fireside chat with Smartkarma Insight Provider, Nicolas. We will be taking question and answers, so please feel free to share your questions in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. During this webinar, I will also be sharing links on how you can connect with the Boustead Singapore team as well as with Nick, so keep a lookout for messages in your chat box. Without much delay, I will now hand it over to Debbie and Janet to take the webinar forward. Over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Vivi. Good evening to everyone. Thank you to Smartkarma once again for inviting us to speak at this corporate webinar. We are happy to be sharing the Boustead story with you today. Now, before we start, here's the usual disclaimer statement. Boustead Singapore was established in 1828, and that makes us 193 years old today. We are Singapore's oldest continuous organization, and we have been listed on the SGX Mainboard since 1975. We focus on niche transformative solutions to support sustainable shared socio-economic growth in global markets and to improve the quality of life for many. Boustead Singapore has 4 key business divisions. The first is Energy Engineering Division, which provides critical process technologies and eco-sustainable solutions to the global ONG, petrochemical, and energy industries. Under our Real Estate Division, we have Boustead Projects Limited, which is a 52.9% owned subsidiary of Boustead Singapore. It is also separately listed on the SGX Mainboard. This division provides innovative real estate solutions such as eco-sustainable and future-ready business parks and industrial developments for companies across diverse sectors. Next, our Geospatial Division provides for professional services and exclusively distributes S3 ArcGIS technology, the world's leading geographic information system, or GIS, smart mapping and location analytics platform. This division has over 13,000 clients, including key government agencies and organizations in 8 countries in the Asia Pacific. Globally, S3 has 53% market share. And lastly, our Healthcare Division provides innovative medical solutions that address niche areas of age-related chronic diseases and mobility issues with a focus on rehabilitative care and sports science. Now, Boustead delivers a global experience. In the past 25 years alone, we have over 1,500 projects installed in 90 countries and territories. We have also been a recipient of many corporate awards, such as the Forbes Asia 200 Best Under a Billion Award. In 2019, we were awarded the Most Transparent Company in the Industrials category and the Sustainability Award runner-up in the Mid-Cap category by the SIAS. Most recently, both Boustead Singapore and Boustead Projects have been awarded the Corporate Excellence and Resilience Award at Singapore Corporate Awards 2021. Under the Boustead business model, we only directly undertake high value-added activities across the value chain for our energy engineering and real estate business segments, such as design and engineering, delivery, and project management. Low value-added activities such as construction and fabrication, manufacturing, and modularization are outsourced. So with this business model, we do not have to constantly invest huge amounts into plant, property, and equipment, thereby reducing our capital expenditure and improving our cash flow. In addition, by outsourcing the low value-added fabrication activities, we can then tap on our global network of subcontractors and achieve 2 other key benefits. First, we can scale our capacity flexibly according to project demands. And second, for our energy engineering business specifically, our smart eco-sustainable solutions can be designed in one part of the world and manufactured in another before having the final product exported to the project site. I'll now move on to Boustead Singapore's key corporate developments in the recent years. In December 2018, Boustead Projects was awarded its largest public sector project on record, JTC Kranji Green, located in the Sungai Kadut Eco District in Singapore. This project has been awarded the BCA Green Mark Platinum rating and will be Singapore's first multi-story recycling facility to house recyclers handling waste streams like metals, paper, and plastics. In January 2019, Boustead Projects has also secured its largest private sector project on record, Sabana Jurong Campus, located in the Jurong Innovation District in Singapore. The project is Singapore's first large-scale business park and industrial development, and it has achieved the BCA Green Mark Platinum Super Low Energy rating. This sprawling campus is set to become Sabana Jurong's global headquarters. In August 2019, Boustead International Heaters, under our Energy Engineering Division, secured contract of about 100 million Singapore dollars from ONG Industries. This contract involves the design, engineering, and supply of waste heat recovery units for a major energy infrastructure development in Europe. In March 2020, we all know the COVID-19 pandemic started, and thereafter there was a 4-month-long period of circuit breaker followed by a built environment shutdown from April to July 2020. Following the reopening of our project sites, our engineering and construction business segment commenced on making up lost ground on several projects in Singapore. Technology also played a key role in mitigating risks associated with the pandemic, allowing activities to be conducted in a safe and productive manner. In August 2020, Boustead Geospatial Division was awarded a landmark 30 million Australian dollars contract by an Australian federal government department. And lastly, in December 2020, we sold our water solutions unit, Boustead Celcom Water Solutions, to Chip Eng Seng for 7.3 million Singapore dollars. So now I'll hand the session over to Janet, who will take you through the rest of the presentation.
Hi, good evening all. So now I'll actually move on to year 2021, which is one of the most exciting year of corporate development for the group. So one of it is actually the successful launch of the Boustead Industrial Fund, BIF. Seeking steady returns through strategic planning, BIF was launched in March with 14 seed assets with a valuation of 511 million. It also achieved a one-off value unlocking gain and is expected to gradually expand its portfolio to unlock further value of properties as well as to generate steady returns. So moving on, with both listed entities of Boustead having its financial year end at 31st March, we announced the FY 2021 financial results in May. Boustead Singapore recorded a net profit of 113.1 million and a record annual dividend of 8 cents per share. Boustead Projects recorded a net profit of 131.7 million and distributed a record annual dividend of 15.4 cents per share. So moving on to June, Boustead Projects extended its presence in Vietnam and signed a $12.5 million option for a 49% interest in KTG and Boustead Industrial Logistics Fund. This option agreement is expected to help Boustead Projects grow its income yielding leasehold portfolio and expand regionally. So more recently in August, we acquired 117 million Sing dollars mezzanine debt, as well as exercised a share charge over the subsidiary holding the Orchard Hills property. We recently announced our first half FY 2022 financial results in November. So Boustead Singapore recorded a net profit of 21.3 million and announced an interim dividend of 1.5 cents per share. Boustead Projects recorded a net profit of 5.9 million. So in the same month in November this year, Boustead Projects divested 351 Umbrella, a 7-story multi-user smart development, which obtained its TOP earlier this year in March, to BIF at 121 million Sing dollars. So moving on to the performance highlights, I'll first walk you through the group revenue and as well as the group net profit. So looking at the group revenue for the first half of FY 2022, we recorded an increase of 17% year on year from 289.7 million in the same period last year. And then in terms of net profit, we marginally decreased by 2% year on year from 21.8 million last year. So overall, looking at the revenue comparing this year versus the past 2 years in FY 2020, FY 2021, especially it was boosted by large projects from the real estate division. Profit was bumped up by the successful launch of BIF and as well as the energy engineering division, which had secured large contracts in the past 2 years. So while revenue is coming down, proportionately related is the gross margin and as well as the subsequent net profit. So we expect group revenue to not be at the same levels of what we have seen in FY21 and FY20. So reason being, as order book backlog is coming back as we are rebuilding it, we are targeting smaller contracts in high value sector for the real estate division. We are not intending to bid for such large projects as seen in previous years under Boustead projects, especially during this recovery period. In terms of engineering, energy engineering division wise, it is also not securing the same kind of large projects that we have seen before, as today we are looking at the disconnect between the oil prices and the inquiry pipeline. So what this would mean to the gross margins and earning is that the absolute quantity will come down, but the quality of earning is improved over time as we selectively go into this smaller contracts within the high value sector. So we are actually really looking at the emphasis on quality of revenue over the quantity of revenue, which is ultimately more sustainable. So for a 193-year company like us, this is key to our navigation through the challenges. Okay, so next on, exciting information for investors like you and I, in my private capacity, of course. Performance highlights for Boustead Singapore. The essence is that Boustead Singapore continues to grow our asset base, and we are still giving out very decent dividends, as some of you might term it a good dividend generator. So looking at our past performance for in terms of financial results, looking at the net asset value, especially for the most recent first half of FY 2022, we have recorded an increase of 21% year on year, comparing the same period last year from 73.6 cents. EPS, earnings per share, has come down marginally, decreased by about a 2% year on year from the 4.5%, from the 4.5 cents from the same period last year. So in terms of dividend, for FY 2022, we declared 8 cents dividend per share. So this comprised an ordinary dividend of 3 cents, a special dividend of 4 cents, and as well as an interim ordinary dividend of 1 cent, which had been paid prior to the end of the year. So for first half FY 2022, which has just been announced in November, we have announced a 1.5 cent dividend for first half. So it is actually an increase from the 1 cent declared for the same period last year. So moving on to the last slide of our presentation. Before I end off our presentation to you, here is my elevator speech. If there are 6 things that you need to remember about Boustead Singapore, this is it. Firstly, our multi-sector resilience in energy engineering, real estate, geospatial, and healthcare. Our in-depth expertise globally in 90 countries and territories, our proven track record in management and unlocking value, our strong fundamentals with robust balance sheet, our recurring income, and let me just reinforce some information here in terms of recurring income to you. Our geospatial division is growing strongly and will continue to grow. 60% of our geospatial revenue is recurring in nature. And also at the real estate side, looking at BIF and as well as our fund management platform, they are intended to be a long-term recurring income avenue. And lastly, in terms of dividend payout ratio for the last 10 years, we are at 45%. So thank you very much for your attention today. Stay well and keep safe. Now we'll move on to Nick and Keith for the Fireside Chat. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Janet. Thank you, Debbie. So I'm Nick. I'm a Smartkarma Insight Provider. I've been following Boustead for many years, and I've met Keith throughout the years in Singapore. So Keith, if we can start our chat with basically one of the key concerns that investors have always had about your real estate exposure is how to monetize that. And for many years, there was speculation that you do a REIT on the SGX, as the SGX is very well known for having REITs and the success that they have. But in the end, earlier this year, as explained briefly in the presentation, you chose a different route. So can you explain maybe why you made the decision that you did, why you didn't form a REIT, or maybe try to combine with another REIT and give a larger exposure? So can you give us your views? Thanks.
Thanks, Nick. Well, I guess you could say that certainly the REIT is something which every investor or most investors in Singapore would be very familiar with. Singapore being a market, a prime market for such vehicles. For us, REITs were one of the options that were under consideration. And for a long time, it was either we do a REIT, we work with a partner to do a REIT, or we try to do this in a private manner. And I think we really went down that road where for a few years, we explored every one of those options in a very detailed manner. We found that among the partners that we had spoken to, many were not quite aligned with our thinking, our philosophy about the long-term nature of a successful REIT. And so in the end, it fell apart in the sense that because the partners could not agree on that thinking, essentially it wouldn't have been a good idea to get in bed together in that sense, right? The other part of it was that, if we thought about it, what were we trying to achieve? Really three things. One would be to recycle capital so that we could basically recycle it into new developments and grow things further for the company. The second bit of it would be to reward our shareholders because of their patience in allowing us to unlock the value of the properties in a timely manner. And the third thing would really be that we wanted to make this a sustainable business that was integrated with all the other parts of our business. So we already had the design and engineering, we had the development side and ownership of properties. So this if you think about the private real estate fund that we finally formed, Boustead Industrial Fund, this was the final piece of that puzzle. And it was really to achieve being a strong sponsor as well as showing to the new investors that we were able to provide a strong pipeline of properties that would be continuing after the fact that Boustead Industrial Fund was formed. So, Boustead Industrial Fund, the formation of it wasn't the end game. The end game is something that is much, much longer. And this is just really the beginning of that. A new fund management business, if you think about it, that complements everything that we do. Now,
So investors should expect this segment to grow, right? This is something where you see growth and you see yourself expanding, correct?
That is exactly it. Right now, we're probably looking at it as being a low base, in fact. And if we look at the way that it's managed, we would be treated as if we are like a REIT manager, earning the same types of fees. May be a bit different from the listed REIT manager, but in general, the types of fees are very similar. So essentially with that, obviously the larger the fund grows, or Boustead Industrial Fund grows, the more that the revenue recurring in nature would grow. And over time, we would expect this then to approximate somewhat of a REIT manager. The other aspect that we had to consider was that we do face the same regulatory restrictions on transfer of properties into this vehicle as we would have faced in a REIT case. So essentially, I guess you can say that if you look at the current market and the REITs out there, most of them are at least $1 billion or more in terms of size. So the only way for us to basically launch this with a smaller portfolio would then be to take it in a private manner with a set of investors who are aligned with a long-term view on the properties. And so essentially, we launched this with 500 million in properties. We still have about another 700 to 800 million worth of properties. One of them, as Janet pointed out, 351 or Bradle was recently actually injected into the Boustead Industrial Fund. So it's a signal actually of the intent of growing this further. And basically over the long term, we should see more of that happening in a more consistent manner over the years.
Can you give any key, because of course the presentation was very short, but maybe for the interest of investors, can you give some key statistics about the property? A lot of the REITs, they release like the WALEs, the weighted average, lease, etc., and the yield that they get on the properties. Is there some kind of key metrics that you could point investors to convince them that your offering is actually quite attractive?
Certainly, I guess if you look at the industrial REITs out there, a lot of the WALEs are actually under 5 years. We went into this with a WALE of about 7 years. And essentially, if we look at the notes that are tagged to this private or to Boustead Industrial Fund are returning to the investors in Boustead Industrial Fund 7% return. So you could say that would approximate the cap rate, which would be expected going forward. So I guess you could say that when you look then at where the high quality industrial REITs are today, Ascendus, Mapletree, they would be trading at about 4, 5, maybe subpar 5%. And those that are of a weaker nature, poor sponsor, inability to grow, for example, would be very high single digits or even potentially above 10%. So we would then be somewhere in between in terms of the quality. But at the same time, if we talk about our portfolio, the quality is actually very good, really, because there are a lot of single tenanted properties in there. So
is it 100% Singapore-based portfolio?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
So the mandate is 100% Singapore, and in fact, Boustead Industrial Fund has the ability also to acquire from third parties, not just from Boustead projects, and also to do redevelopments and developments of its own outside of Boustead projects. So there's this flexibility and capacity there as well that's in a way funded then by other investors that are involved in Boustead Industrial Fund. Okay,
understood. Maybe we'll switch to another segment that you've been active in for a long time, is oil and gas. I mean, oil prices have been performing quite well this year. I mean, oil's now about above 71. A month ago was above $80 or so. So as someone who is in that sector, are you now seeing boom times coming back, or is there a reason why your clients, your oil and gas customers are still not spending the way they did maybe in 2012, 2013 when oil prices were over $100? So can you give some color on how that segment is doing?
Right. So I mean, Janet pointed out earlier, there's this great disconnect that's happening between where the oil price is and the actual investments that are going into the market. We're seeing really a trickle of investments is very, very low, somewhat similar to 2015, 2016 period when we saw oil prices collapse. So oil price really then is just one driver really of that investment. I think for many of our clients, the priorities are on seeing less volatility in oil price, but more of the ability to see a sustainable oil price over a longer period of time. And if we look at the periods when investments really took place, they took place when oil prices were not necessarily high, but they were stable. So I think that part of it is right now lacking in the market, because we've seen it go down to $20 per barrel for Brent, all the way up now to about 75. So
it even went negative at one point.
Yeah, that was crazy. I mean, unheard of before this, right? So for investors, being the oil and gas companies, I think for them, really, it's what's the long-term view like? And clearly also there are the effects of climate change and the pressure really coming from the regulatory side of things as to what is going to happen. So there's a bit of uncertainty there. And I feel that it will take a bit of time to play out in terms of for the oil and gas companies, in terms of them making their decisions eventually.
So basically you're saying that it's going to not be a a very sharp recovery in the oil and gas segment as that is concerned to you, correct? So yeah.
Yes, I would say that. And it will also impact our business a bit differently. So we really have two key products, right, in terms of our largest oil and gas company. One is the process heaters, which are used directly to heat the oil and gas processes in terms of refining and petrochemical plants. That part of it, clearly over the long term, the trend will be downwards, right? But at the same time, we have another product category called waste heat recovery units. And that's where you're recycling the waste heat that's coming out of the processes. And it's in fact seen as much more environmentally friendly, because of the fact that you're not putting this out in the environment, first of all. And secondly, you're not wasting additional fuel to reheat the process. So these could actually help our clients in terms of perhaps meeting the government's regulatory pressure on them. So essentially, we see that part of it as demand should continue to be decent at the very least, because it's not a very high capital expenditure type of equipment, but it can clearly help the clients even in this kind of environment where there's a lot of pressure.
Okay. Then on the third segment, in the interest of time, we'll switch to geospatial. It's an interesting and oftentimes, I think, misunderstood segment of your business. I mean, it's definitely not something that many people will be very familiar with. So can you maybe expand during the pandemic? I understand you were offering some crucial services to the Singapore government. I mean, how did you help them, during the pandemic, and what is maybe the outlook for this segment?
Yeah, I would say that smart mapping became a very key part of the fight against COVID and the pandemic. It was made very famous by Johns Hopkins University's map, right? The coronavirus map. And if you look at the bottom right corner, in fact, it says powered by Esri there. So there was a lot of global exposure, first of all, for the Esri brand because of that. And if you look at the regions that we cover, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Australia, a lot of government agencies were building their own versions of these maps, basically to do a few things: contact tracing, right? Location of healthcare facilities, and also to provide information to the public on what to do, what not to do. So to give you an example, right, here in Singapore, there's this website that's set up by NParks called Safe Distancing NParks. It's actually based on Esri technology. So they have the information, the data, but they map it out, and it tells park goers basically where it's crowded, please don't go there. There's also yet another app that was created by the government. And basically that particular app is for malls. It actually tells you the density of the number of people in malls. So again, it's a good informative tool to citizens, right? To let them know, look, this place is very crowded at the moment. Please don't go. And they apply really the safe distancing rules, right? Because it's all based again on geography. The other application that has been used more lately is really in the location for logistics. And that's really because if you think about all the vaccines that have been made available, quite a number of them are very time sensitive. So essentially, if there are no cold chain logistics available, you have to get that shot into the arm as soon as possible, right? So in a place like Australia, which is so huge, unlike Singapore, essentially to get that vaccine across to the small towns is quite a problem. And essentially they would need all this mapping out of their logistics routes as basically planning in order to make sure that they can roll this out effectively across the country.
Okay. And so, I mean, these were now very specific times. I mean, we all hope that, you know, things will normalize more in the next few years. So what are growth avenues in geospatial, maybe, you know, that you think of that governments have now seen the use of, that are you getting more inquiries for some of your solutions from other countries, or is this a very specific Singapore-based solution set?
I would say it's widespread, not just across countries, but also across different sectors. Increasingly, the private sector, of course, is recognizing the value of it. It's just that data is the key to being fed into the smart platform. The other aspect of it is really that smart cities are driving this. If you talk about many smart city implementations going on across the region, Singapore Smart Nation, of course, is leading things and is very, very well known and also widely publicized globally. But places like Australia, they have over 30 smart city implementations going on. So essentially, without that underlying geographic aspect to the data, you can't really make very good use of basically the software that is going to run the smart city. So essentially, this is that underlying platform there. And another thing is really that Esri technology currently is being used heavily in a lot of ESG related programs, particularly on the environmental side of things. So we're even seeing the carbon regulator in Australia using a version of the Esri platform, basically to map out their kind of operations. And also is being applied right now in terms of agriculture and the reduction of emissions in that particular area, because agriculture, as you know, accounts for about 25% of global emissions.
Okay. Are you also, you know, when you talk about ESG, and maybe this ties in maybe geospatial / oil and gas, is there some of the solutions that you are having in there that are also going to be used in any of the renewable segment, being solar, hydro, wind, offshore, onshore? Is there anything like that that could provide a new growth avenue for any of the Boustead oil and gas or geospatial services?
Well, certainly there will be applications like that. I would say that it would be really about, so just take an example like wind. It would really be about taking the geographic data related to wind patterns, climate patterns, and figuring out where would be the best place to actually place a wind farm, for example. Same thing with solar. Basically, again, where are the best locations? And, you know, we've heard about the Australian solar farm that is going to power quite a fair bit of Singapore in the future. Basically, that, if you think about it, the transmission lines that have to be laid, right, are running over thousands of kilometers, right? So again, something like smart mapping would be used to basically map out how you would basically place that transmission line and across the best terrain possible.
Okay. Maybe I'll go 2 more questions from me, and then I have some questions in the chat.
I have a question here from Hongju Lee. He asks, the current BIF is limited to only properties in Singapore. Is there any plans for an overseas BIF, in particular the developments we're potentially seeing in Vietnam?
So we did mention the KTG and Boustead Industrial Logistics Fund that we are looking to set up in Vietnam. I would say that the idea is very similar. We want to expand our Vietnam presence, and at the same time, we want to be more involved in the development, ownership, and then perhaps fund management business in an overseas capacity. And why we haven't lumped it all together with Boustead Industrial Fund is because the risk profiles would be very different between Singapore properties and those overseas. And hence, that's also one of the reasons why Boustead Industrial Fund is strictly towards Singapore properties only. And the Vietnam fund, if you look at it, would be Vietnamese properties and also with a local Vietnamese partner there who can help to build things up together with us.
Just continue the 2 more corporate side questions. So I noticed via the SGX filings that you have been buying back shares in the market quite regularly. Your stock's about $1 or thereabouts. You have about 75 cents of cash. So that's a lot of cash buffer. So how should investors think about the rest of your business outside of your cash balance basically being valued so low? What are some of the value unlocking opportunities that the group has?
Right. So I guess we've always looked at unlocking value in different ways across this group. It's something that goes back in terms of history and track record, all the way to our days when we owned an associate company called Easy Call, successfully built an education business out of it, and distributed in specie. In fact, the shares there at that time, if I remember correctly, about 5-6 cents, rose up to 80 cents and eventually was delisted at about 40 cents. So you can see the value creation that had happened for shareholders. The other part of it is that in 2015, of course, we listed Boustead Projects separately, did also a dividend in specie. So our shareholders got the shares really for free, and Boustead Projects itself then did a value unlocking event of its own. So as we see it, I would say that the various businesses, if they manage to reach a certain scale, have the ability, obviously, then to stand alone and be on their own. These represent then future value unlocking. The other aspect of it is really that this cash that we have affords us the ability to look at new opportunities and without having to call on existing shareholders to come up with cash, right, when we come across such opportunities. So I think that's really key in terms of having that cash there and the ability then to look at opportunities.
Has there been any pressure? I mean, pressure maybe is not a good word, but any suggestions from many shareholders that your dividend payout should be raised because the cash balance is getting too large?
I guess shareholders always love dividends, so that would be a very regular communication to us. But I think it's also not any secret that Mr. Wong, our chairman, has stated that if you want to keep a company sustainable, essentially you have to make the right investments for the long term. And so if we were to give out everything in terms of dividends one day when we come across the right opportunity, and we have to basically ask shareholders for money at that point in time, I don't think is a good thing. The second bit, of course, is having the cash ready means that if the opportunity comes, we can move very quickly. We don't need to have to wait to raise that cash. So I think that's really been the idea behind why we have been holding on. We've been quite generous, or at least it's been a decent dividend yield, I think, for most investors. On average, they should be seeing at least about 4 or 5% in terms of dividend yield based on when they entered. But in recent times, with the share price dipping quite a fair bit during the pandemic period, especially, they could have got a much bigger yield, obviously, because of where they entered.
So one of the shareholders that is on your register, which is considerably large outside of the founder, of course, you have Fidelity, who owns close to 10%. I mean, how is it's a very, Fidelity does not own a 10% stake in many Singapore listed businesses, if any, outside of Boustead. So how is your history, maybe too long, but how is your interaction with them? Do you often speak to them? Do they give suggestions or anything you can elaborate?
Sure. Fidelity, I would say, is not an activist type of fund manager. So obviously we speak every now and then. The relationship is very cordial and professional. They may have suggestions, but I don't think that anything is really forced upon a company in that sense. So they will not be the types that go out and make a vocal statement in public, right, about something that they disagree with a particular company. But overall, I would say that they're very supportive type of shareholder and very fair-minded, understanding that with the good comes the bad sometimes, in terms of business not always going the way of every company. So yeah, essentially we're very happy to have Fidelity on board. And clearly they have been a long-term shareholder as well. They've been with us about 6 years already, I think, if I remember correctly. Yeah, so they have been with us a long time.
Okay. I have some more questions. We have, I think, 2-3 more minutes, and so I will ask some some questions in the chat. One of the questions is, Keith, could you shed some light on the end game for the mezzanine debt? Will we be taking over the Orchard Hill development eventually?
Right. So I guess that's a question on a lot of shareholders' minds. I can't give you a definite answer now. I would say that a lot of, or rather the options are all being considered at this point in time by our management, because it's not a simple kind of situation. But if we lay out the various things that could happen, one is we could eventually take over the property and operate it ourselves. The second is that maybe we don't take over, but eventually the building is sold, because there are senior creditors involved in this whole process as well. So whatever it is, though, I guess if we look at it, why were we willing to go in to such a deal is because the property was there as pretty much the collateral for the deal, and our entry gives us a very big margin of safety in terms of where we are at and the current valuation of the property. Okay,
I have another question here, Keith. So Boustead has dabbled into a handful of investments in the past, which Mr. Wong identified through his Asia Pac network. Yesterday, it was announced there was an investment into digital assets via Intraco that Mr. Wong was introducer and participant. The question, was that opportunity considered whereby Boustead invested rather than Mr. Wong personally?
Mr. Wong entered into that particular transaction in his personal capacity, nothing to do with Boustead at all. And I would say that I guess if you look at, I can't really comment on his own personal investments, right? But obviously he may have a different investment thinking about certain areas compared to where it is for the company. But with company being Boustead, you would say that he always has to keep in mind, obviously, the interests of minority shareholders as well.
Yeah. And then another question, what's your highest growing sector within Boustead and Boustead project? Where would you see both companies in the next few years?
So I guess the question was really among our divisions, which is the highest growing, right?
Yeah.
That would definitely be, I wouldn't say the highest growing, but the steadiest, where we see the long-term growth would be geospatial technology. And that's, we are even willing to say that over the long term, we think that this business should be able to grow high single digits in terms of revenue growth, and long term being 10 years or more. So that's the kind of confidence we have in the market for geospatial technology. The other businesses will have a bit more volatility, clearly, because they are project-based or contract-based. And so essentially that is basically following the seasonality, or rather the business cycle for that particular sector. And then for Boustead projects, I would say that clearly the future is in the real estate fund management side of the business. Engineering and construction, while it will be there, it's a sort of bread and butter business, but no matter what, you're always facing a very competitive environment, and one in which basically the margins can never be very, very high, really, because the competition would then come in and try and lower things down. So I guess you could say then, at least on the real estate fund management business, that has a very long-term view. And if we can continue to capture more development opportunities, then we continue to also grow the pipeline for Boustead Industrial Fund, plus what we have overseas.
Okay, now with the very last question, and then we really have to wrap up. So basically, there's one last very specific question. Any updates on Tongzhou development? When is the expected completion?
Well, that I would say is information that is usually put out by Perennial, but anyway, this consortium is led by Perennial, and the date that has been given publicly is 2022-2023 for phase 1. And right now the construction is under progress, so essentially we hope that they continue on schedule. The good thing is that so far in China, obviously, one, they work very fast, but the second bit is that since the pandemic is more under control there, essentially they face much less disruptions compared to other parts of the world in terms of construction.
Okay. All right. I think we have to, in the interest of time, we have to wrap up here. Thanks, Keith. It was really interesting to hear your latest updates and views on all the different segments that Boustead has. So, Vidi, I will pass it back to you.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Nick, for some very interesting questions. Thank you to the Boustead team for sharing more about all the 4 divisions of Boustead and the sectors as well, the opportunity and challenges for Boustead. It was a very interactive session. We could have gone on for longer, but in the interest of time, we would like to wrap it up here. I would like to thank our attendees who could join us today live. Thank you so much. And we will see you again very soon. Have a great rest of the week. And thank you again for joining.
Thanks, Vidi.
Thank you.
Thank you to the audience out there.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.